KetoCon will be in Austin again. I know she had initially, she being Robin Switzer, who is the primary organizer now, said that she'd mentioned that she was going to move it potentially when I interviewed, but she's going to keep it in Austin, and it sounds like it may stay there indefinitely. And then I think they're changing the name to something else. I think Hack Your Health, or the Hack Your Health Summit, or something like that. It was interesting to see there was a lot of biohacky stuff there. Some of the stuff that I kind of was very skeptical about, but I played along and did some of the stuff just to see. Lark bravely got into the cold plunge. I cheered her on to see her do that, so that was quite good. And so I think she stayed in there. I don't know how long. Lark, how long did you stay in there? About 10 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, something like that. So it's pretty good for your first time. And
7 minutes, Shawn. Thanks for the encouragement. I don't really hate you, even though I told you I hated you when I was in the cold water. I was going for 5 minutes, and then Britton told me that the previous gal did 7. So I'm like, I can do 7.
Yeah, there you go. And then, how did you feel when you got out of that thing? Were you shivering and stuff, or what was the deal like?
Initially, I felt super warm, like real warmth all over my body, just beautiful. And then the shivering set in for about 30-40 minutes. The next 30-40 minutes, I just was definitely couldn't control shivering. But
that's a workout, and that's a workout in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, it was a really good experience. I did coaching and encouraging beforehand too about how to breathe through it and stuff like that. But yeah, it was so.
Yeah, when you're shivering, your metabolic rate is something like tripled. It's huge. You expend an enormous amount of calories by shivering, just because every muscle in your body literally is contracting. You watch people where I saw one guy and his pectoral muscles were just contracting, like crazy, and it's kind of interesting to see that. I see Stephen has his hand up. So Stephen, good morning. How are you today?
I'm fine. I was just going to put my latest blog in the chat.
Okay.
That you were kind enough to retweet last night, and briefly mention that it is about trying to improve labeling in U.S. for the benefit, especially for U.S. Cattlemen and ranchers. Because right now, labels on food that say product of the USA can be beef that's born, raised, and slaughtered in another country, and then processed into ground beef and packaged here, and be called a product of the US. This new labeling bill only pertains to retail in the USDA, but it's a step in the right direction. So anything that's labeled as a product of the USA has to be born, raised, and slaughtered in the USA. And my blog has some Q&A with people from the American Grass-Fed Association, and has links to where people can make public comment to say that they support this labeling. And the more comments they get, the better. So if anybody here would kindly go to that link if they live in the US and make a comment saying that we want this and we want it right now. And if you agree, and encourage any and everybody else that who loves US beef and wants to support US ranchers to do the same. Thank you.
Stephen, let me two comments on that. One, if you wouldn't mind, because this is being live streamed to my YouTube as well. So if you feel like it, go onto the YouTube and throw it in the link there as well.
Okay.
For people on YouTube, because this will be the people on YouTube will be able to watch it later. And then the other question is, what is the counter argument to doing so? Because it seems obvious. Why would I not want to know where my food comes from? Even if I don't do anything with that information, it seems like truth and labeling just makes sense. I kind of know, there's talk about, price control, being able to do this thing more cheaply. The big packing companies tend to oppose this. And you know, we had that with the cool, you know, the M-Cool law back, you know, back 10 years ago, but then it got repealed in what, 2014 or something like that. So why are people opposed to labeling our food as
Well, the packers are global companies, so obviously, and two of them are Brazilian based, so it's economics. They can produce everything cheaper there, and so I mean, yeah, I think there is an economic argument that's made within this proposed label, and that, you know, if they can't, there, you know, it has to be cost competitive. If there isn't a cost competitive alternate, that they, and it's also voluntary, unlike Cool was mandatory. So if you want to put you can still buy beef that's not labeled, you just can't label it as US. Now the bigger, you know, I mean, it was conceived as not being, it was the World Trade Association that shot down Cool, and the major complaints came from Mexico and Canada, who were the big importers at that time. And right now they're also complaining against this because it does affect the supply chains. Because if you have a cow calf operation or a stocker operation that's in Canada or Mexico, and you sell into the US feedlots, you know, your beef cannot therefore be labeled a product of the USA, where now as it can, even if it's slaughtered in Mexico. I mean, most of what comes into the US, even from Brazil and Australia, is called it's the beef trimmings. It's all the XX cuts. So what mainly is imported and is the trim that's mixed with fat, and that's processed here, even though it's born, raised, and slaughtered elsewhere. The trim's imported here and processed here, and made into ground beef here, and that's most of what's imported. So that's and it's hard, and it's not traced, so you don't know where. If you go into Walmart or buy a burger at in McDonald's, you don't know you really have no idea where that beef's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if they had data on when the mandatory country of origin labeling law was in place. Did they show statistically that it encouraged Americans to stay with U.S. beef and they were less likely to buy imported beef? Does it really even make a difference on consumer behavior?
That's a good question. I don't know. And you know, I mean, this proposed labeling change, product of the USA, it's according to what Greg told me, it's only going to really affect 12% of the market. It doesn't affect it doesn't affect McDonald's or any kind of QSR. It affects the stuff you buy in the grocery store.
Yeah, because if I'm getting my stuff direct from the rancher, I already know it's basically,
yeah, you know it. You know.
So the other question is, who is sponsoring the bill? Is it a bipartisan bill?
It's not a bill. It's a
okay.
rule change. It doesn't go through Congress. It's just going through. It's a USDA rule change. They have the ability to set labeling.
So Tom Vilsack, is he the guy that's pushing this, or who is
he supports it? It wouldn't get any further if Vilsack didn't support it.
Okay. So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, any idea on the likelihood of this happening? I mean, I'm sure there's people lobbying against it, I would imagine.
Well, the Packers and the organizations that are supported by Packers, they oppose it. I have read some of my beef industry periodicals that says who supports it and who doesn't support it. I mean, it's really being pushed by it's the guy at, it's U.S. Cattlemen's Association. What's that guy's name? Open and Competitive Markets, which is another group that Mike Callicrate founded. and there's a third group. I forgot. So most of the independent family ranchers are very pro for it, but it's usually it's the packers who are interested, and they don't care. They're globalists, so they don't. They want to have whatever they want to have.
Okay. I'm just going to jump. There's a comment on YouTube asking me about, some guy asked me, somebody in Wisconsin looks like me. His last name is Baker. Am I related to them, or is that my brother? And the answer is no, not to my knowledge, unless my dad got up to stuff I didn't know about. But as far as I know, I don't have any brothers in Wisconsin. So just answering that. Okay.
I'm just gonna add a lot of the questions you're asking, and there are a lot of questions. I asked a lot of questions of Carrie and Greg, and they took the time to give me some detailed responses. So it answers some of the questions you were posing, but not the one about who's really imposing it and why. That was a good question I should have asked.
Okay. Well, I mean, certainly I would encourage folks. And I think we all should take an interest. All of us are meat eaters, and all of us appreciate that. And I think anything that, I think there's no harm in knowing where your food comes from. Now, if you want to eat Canadian beef, that's up to you. And a lot of people think it's great. I mean, Alberta, they love the beef up there, and so some people may prefer that. But at least you should have the choice. Or some people may like to eat. It's true. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but most of our grass-fed beef that comes into this country is imported. I think I can't remember the number, but it's a quite high statistic.
Typically, it used to come from Australia and New Zealand, and some from Uruguay. That's how they produce their beef. But Australia had a huge drought, and they cut a lot of their cattle herds back. So they weren't as exporting much. And in 2018-19, Brazil was allowed to re-import fresh meat. So Brazil's imports have increased over 500%. So I used to say it was, I used to tell people, because I'm concerned about deforestation. I used to tell people that you ate a burger here, the likelihood of it coming from Brazil was next to nothing. Mm-hmm. So if you use aluminum or drink coffee, you were probably more responsible for deforestation. I can't make that statement as confidently anymore, because what's increased is the beef trim from Brazil. It's now, I think, more than from Australia. And the problem with tracking supplies in Brazil, they'll say it's not from the forest, but they only look at where the beef comes from the feedlot. They don't do the full blockchain, and a lot of the suppliers to the feedlots have cow-calf and stocker operations that are on deforested land. So I mean, gives fodder to people who want to make anti-beef arguments, but I find it's necessary to be truthful too. So
yeah, but and as you've mentioned, the whole Brazilian situation is more complex than just cows are destroying the field. I mean, the deforestation is occurring for multiple reasons, and
I've written about that as well. I mean, it's part of a process.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that where they used to traditionally graze has now been taken over in some cases by sugar production. So they've kind of
it's sugar, and they grow soy everywhere too. So in the South, Brazil has a huge chicken production. They're like the third largest chicken producer in the world, and they plant soy, and most of that's in southern Brazil. And so that's where all the fields were, and they've been replaced with soy fields. But the main driver, and it's a lot more profitable for soy, but in the Amazon, there's a 2-year moratorium. So if they deforest land and gather all the timber and mine for aluminum and iron, they then have to wait 2 years before it can be put into soy. So in those 2 years, they run cattle. Mm-hmm. So it's an intermediate step. And I mean, if you don't have if you don't have that moratorium, like in the Cerrado, which is a province that's for a little bit further south, then that goes straight into soy, and that's a delicate ecosystem too. So it's and a lot of their soy is exported to China, and the oil is all used for biofuel or cooking oil. So you can't really separate the crop from its uses.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of Brazil, I saw something on social media where apparently there is one region of Brazil that is planning on banning ultra processed foods from the schools, which I think, in my view, is a good thing. And whereas we have places like New York where they're going to largely increase that by the reduction of meat in there. The replacements for meats are often tend to be ultra processed. I mean, and there's studies out there. It's interesting. There's a study came out a year or two ago looking at processed food consumption in relation to how much meat you eat, and what they found was vegetarians ate more processed food than meat eaters, and vegans ate the most processed food. The numbers were not hugely different, but certainly there. And so we know unequivocally that when you remove animal products, i.e. butter, what do you get instead? You get margarine, which margarine is, a great example of this ultra processed nonsense. So at least in some regions in Brazil, they are all the problems that country has, at least there's some, level of good things going on that are there. And you have another link about the deforestation process. So somebody might want to read that. Okay. Does anybody else have anything they want to share, discuss, talk about today? Questions, anything like that? Everybody doing okay? James, are you back in Bermuda? Did you make it safely back in from Austin, Texas? I assume so.
Yes, sir. I sure did. It was great to meet you in person, Dr. Baker. What a great weekend. I made so many connections. Good to see Lark and Danny in person and just connect with people. Awesome time, and made it back safely and back to work already.
Yeah. It was quite a good conference. I was, I'd been to KetoCon. I think that was my fourth time speaking at that event. And this, to me, I mean, was one of my favorite times I went. One, because I got to meet you guys, but two, it just seemed a little more, I don't know, it just seemed like a little more going on from my perspective. And maybe it's just, I don't know, it could have been my just personal experience, but I got to tell you guys went to my talk, and I just, I basically asked the audience, how many people are eating more meat and less vegetables, and about 80% of the people kept their hands up and said they felt better. I'm like, well, there's nothing for me to talk about then. You guys already get it. It's kind of interesting that conference has largely become meat focused. It's more or less carnivore at this point, and that's been the trend. The trend I observed, as I and others started promoting a carnivorous diet, that the low carb ketogenic conference became more and more carnivore now to where it's almost the majority. So it's kind of interesting to see, and therefore I got pretty swamped, I had so many people wanting to share their stories with me very excitedly, and I was more than happy to hear them all. All right, Lark has her hand up.
Yeah, and Shawn, I don't know if you possibly didn't get to it, but the women in carnivore panel, or the carnivore women panel, I can't remember what they called it, but it was for carnivore women. It was overflowing in one of the breakout rooms, needed to be in the bigger. There were 200 plus people.
Yeah, I heard about it. I didn't go. I didn't see it. I unfortunately,
so well attended.
Yeah, the one regret that I had, because I was so busy being overwhelmed meeting people, I didn't get to see very many of the talks. And I think the only talk I actually saw, other than my own, was Kevin Stock's talk. But I also was kind of bummed they had Stephen, they had a large regenerative agriculture panel there. They had Weldon Warren from Holy Cow Beef in Lubbock, Texas, who's a big proponent of regenerative agriculture, and a few other people in there that were on that. And I went to dinner with Weldon and his wife and family. Super nice people, and good quality beef. They supplied the dinner on Friday nights. They had a professional chef cook up some, and I think James, you and I hung out and dinner, I think, and we ate dinner together. But yeah, they had some nice shredded beef and some I don't remember what the other cuts were. New York strip, maybe, I can't remember. I think it was. And then I had some cheese, and that was quite good. So very good dinner to have. But yeah, that was a good time. So glad to be back. My next trip will be take me to the UK. So I'll be speaking at the Physicians Health Collaborative. I think I've got about 6 days on that trip because a day of travel and kind of recovery of jet lag. Then I'll be speaking I'll be at the conference for 3 days. And then David Unwin had requested that he wanted to show me his part of the world and his clinic and his little town and his farm. And so I'm going to spend 2 days with David Unwin. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. I've got to go to San Francisco next weekend, hang out with Masa to get together on, as we get closer and closer to launch and, where we're heading as a direction from the company side. So a lot of traveling this year, which is good and bad. Good that I get to see things and do things and meet with people. Bad that I just get out of my routine, which I like my routine. But anyway, Stephen, you have your hand up again? I can't tell. Or
yeah, I do. I was curious about that regenerative ag panel and how I tend to take a fairly low profile, but I tend to know a lot about these issues more than the people, as much as at least on the metric side in terms of methane and water use and all that kind of stuff. I'm just wondering how does one get invited or involved on the presentation side?
I'm not sure, certainly if you have an interest, I can certainly, contact, get you with Robin because, she's looking for speakers at all the time. And she literally plans, she told me, I don't know if you saw, we interviewed her last month and she's taken a year to basically plan this whole event. So if that's something you'd like to do, I know that you have a tremendous level of knowledge around this stuff and expertise. And so I think you'd be obviously a good addition to any one of those types of conferences. And so just let me know if that's something you want to do, and then I can certainly share your information.
Yeah, I'd be interested because I'm semi-retired, so I'm sort of limited in terms of means. So if I would love to attend all these things, but I can't afford to. So anything that would help mitigate the cost that I can also contribute in some way, that would be very helpful. Because I think, there are a lot of, on the health side, you have all you gurus that I just listen to and don't need to add anything to. But on the environmental side, when it comes to debunking, water use, land use, methane, feed efficiency, and making counter arguments, that's my wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, and I don't know how much of a financial, I mean, full disclosure, other than like a free meal, I paid for my flight, I paid for my hotel. I didn't, I wasn't financially compensated.
But did you have to pay to attend the event?
No, I didn't have to pay to
like
attend.
$300-400,
Right.
they all add up.
Yeah, the speakers don't have to pay for the event, but like I said, some events will actually cover some of your travel expenses and lodging expenses. This one hasn't or doesn't, or maybe it does for some and not for others. I don't know if it does. I know some events, they like some speakers they pay and some they don't. I don't know. I don't really push too hard on that, but
I had one other minor question about this event. Did you make it to Micklethwaite's like I tweeted back to you on Twitter?
No, what is Micklethwaite's? I don't even know.
It's another barbecue place. It's my Boston.
I only ate. I barely ate. I wouldn't say I ate one meal a day basically while I was there, and it was usually the evening meal. And I had two of them were, one I met with a friend of mine, Michael Goldstein, who's just a friend of mine, and he texted me saying, "You're going to be talking. We hook up for a dinner," and so I kind of promised him, and that was kind of a low key thing with just his family. And then the two other meals were, pre-planned already, so that was kind of it. No, I walked across the street for a small lunch at Terry Black's. I had the beef rib and a little bit of brisket. So, but no, maybe next time I'll get in there and do that. So yeah, me and Danny walked across to Terry Black's and we met with another guy that knows me, Mike, who's I've known he's been following me, and we've been following each other on Twitter for 6 or 7 years, however long I've been on Twitter. So There was a comment on YouTube that Jennifer was asking about what percentage of Texas beef in retail is imported, given that Texas has such a huge number of ranches. As Steve, I'm sure you're well aware, Texas has the most cattle of any state in the U.S. I don't know if you know differentially how many state. I don't know if that data is available, like what state imports what percentage of beef, because obviously there's plenty of local beef in Texas. There's no need to do that, but I'm not sure. I don't know if you know that.
No, I don't know any of those stats.
Yeah. I imagine there's some. I mean, some advantage, but again, that's the thing. You'd be surprised. I mean, obviously Texas is going to be a net exporter of beef, I would imagine, because they, like I said, of our nation's 4 million head of cattle, about 22 million of them reside in Texas, and so that's almost 25% of our supply, as in one state. So anyway, James has got his hand up again.
Hey, Dr. Baker, just a good question from Karen that I also wanted to ask you. I had spoken to a few folks about the difference between KetoCon and low carb Denver. Which one do you prefer? I know they're quite different. Than KetoCon, when talking to folks, is more relaxed, a little bit more relaxed, whereas low carb Denver is a little bit more on the doctor side and things like that. What's your thoughts?
Gosh, it's hard to say. I mean, Jeff Gerber did a great job. That was a huge conference, by the way. And it had just a phenomenal lineup of speakers, but it is a little more formal, I guess. Like you're saying, KetoCon tends to be a little more, I guess, a little more relaxed. Yeah, they were low carb Denver. There were, I guess I want to say, it seemed like there were less vendors there, which is a pro or con, depending on what your thoughts are around the vendors. And obviously the facility is very much different. Low carb Denver is in this beautiful hotel, this enormous hotel. And where KetoCon's in a giant auditorium, basically, which, I can't say. I mean, honestly, I know it's kind of a political type of thing, but I enjoyed them both. And I would say that I probably was, I guess from my perspective, low carb Denver is maybe a little less. I certainly met a lot of people, but KetoCon was just a lot of people were more like on the carnivore side. So from a carnivore perspective, KetoCon, and I think it's no longer going to be called KetoCon, whatever it's going to be called, Hack Your Health Con or something like that, is probably, maybe has a higher percentage of people that have adopted a carnivore lifestyle. So I enjoyed, meeting that aspect, because I always like to see the kind of the fruits of the labor, the results of the people that, that have done this. And again, I was quite humbled and overwhelmed by the number of people that, just had all these tremendous things. So I saw Lark's hand go up real quick. Lark, did you have a comment?
So Shawn, sorry to keep pressing the point, and I know you don't forgive my government, but if I can swing an invite, or I don't know if you've already been invited by Low Carb Down Under or Aussie Beef Initiative, would you consider Australia?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I've always liked it. One of my regrets in life is, I spent, a couple of years in New Zealand, and I never made it across the Tasman Sea to see Australia. And, and like I said, obviously, as you know, Australia has not been particularly hospitable to anything for the last couple of years. Now, if that's sort of settling down, and Australia is one of the great beef eating nations and beef producing nations in the world. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's something, I'm looking at next year's, because this year's full. There's no way. I mean, I got too many dang trips. But next year, I mean, it could be, it might be something I try to do with my family if it happens in a time where my family could travel, because I'm sure they would love to do it.
Have they reached out at all, or not yet? Because
no one from that group has reached out.
I've got some inroads. I'll see what I can do for next year. Thanks.
Yeah, and then because like BNS is trying to maybe get me go to India next year, and I've got a few others already sort of starting to already be talked about. I know I'm the keynote speaker at some veterinarian conference in September. I can't remember. I think it's in like Ohio or Missouri or somewhere like that, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, I've already committed to that. I was just somebody asked me to come be the keynote at veterinary
Thanks,
conference.
Shawn.
I think is interesting, but anyway, yeah, I would definitely be open to it, depending on the timing, basically. And like I said, obviously Australia is a big trip, as you know. I mean, it's not a weekend trip. It's a pretty long deal, and so I just have to, I mean, obviously, if I'm going to go, it doesn't make sense for me to go down for the weekend. It's probably, most of these conferences are, like I said, 2-3 day affairs, and so I probably want to have some sort of, what else are you going to do for the week that you're there? Because just flying in for 3 days and flying right back is, it's pretty exhausting.
I'll be your tour organizer.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Steven, another comment.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I went to the Metabolic Health Conference summit last year. It was in Santa Barbara. They're not having it this year, but they're having it next year for people in Florida, East Coast. It's in Clearwater. That's a little, I think, more geared towards the healthcare professional, but I like the nerdy stuff. So, it had Tommy Wood and Dale Bredesen and Lustig and Satya Panda. So it was more about, broader health issues. And I thought it was really great. So that's another one that's worth considering.
Yeah, I actually stopped into one for a visit one year. It was kind of funny that they because I didn't register, and so I was just in a lobby chatting with people. Somebody asked me to come by to say hi, and I did, and then they kind of ran me out because I wasn't a registered guest. So I said, okay, whatever. Genevieve is asking about, is it necessary to eat fish every week so you can get an adequate amount of omega-3s? I would say no. And the reason I say that is because your omega-3 requirements are quite low. I mean, we don't need a lot of them, and you can get enough from eating beef. Now, certainly, grass-finished beef tends to have a little bit more than grain-finished beef, but even in grain-finished beef, I think it provides adequate omega-3s to meet our requirements in general, particularly if you're eating a carnivore diet, because you're eating, again, a lot more beef than the average person would be. So I would say no. There's nothing wrong with eating fish for most people. There are some people that are, sensitive to it though, but so I would say, if you want to really up your omega-3 ratio, yeah, eating fish is the best way to do that. I mean, even more so than eating grass finished versus grain finished. You can eat all the grass finished beef in the world, but it's going to get you nowhere the quantity of omega-3s you're going to get from eating a piece of fish or two a week. That's going to be the biggest discriminator there. So you certainly can. Do you need to? I don't think so. I rarely eat fish. I mean, I'm not opposed to eating fish. Occasionally I like it. Well, when I was in Portugal, I had a few seafood dishes, but it was mostly things like octopus and some shrimp and some squid were the seafood options. I was wanted to get the cod at one point because that's a delicacy there, or the sardines, but I just never, I was just like, man, I'd rather have a steak. I don't know. I like to enjoy what I eat as much as possible, and for me, it tends to be steaks. So I don't think fish is necessary on this diet. I don't think it necessarily is something you should avoid, but if you like it, go for it. Let's see. I'm just looking back on the and this may be one Stephen will comment on. There's a question on YouTube. Is it safe to eat mRNA pork, or I guess eventually beef? That's, again, I can't say definitively, but I'm not as concerned about it as other people might be. I know there's people out there that are screaming about, oh my God, they're trying to vaccinate us by making us eat beef. And I don't think that's an intention. I think it's truly, the reason is to protect these animals from diseases, and whether the mRNA vaccine is efficacious in those animals or not, I don't know. I think even if they do receive that, you've eaten a lot of vaccinated animals. Almost all of us have. I mean, I can tell you that unequivocally, because most animals are vaccinated, unless you very selective and only get it from ranchers that refuse to vaccinate, and very few of them do that. There's only a tiny minority of ranchers that don't vaccinate their animals. And any animal that goes to a feedlot has been vaccinated for the most part. And most of us have been fine with that. And again, I will point out that, cooking meat, and then certainly, our human gut with that super high level of acid in our gut will break down and destroy, I think, any of that, to where I don't think it's a real problem. But I may be wrong. but I'm not worried about it right now. So we'll see what happens. So I don't know if Stephen has any insider knowledge or concern. I know the NCBA came out with a statement saying we have no knowledge or plans of mRNA vaccinating any beef cattle at this time. Now, I think there's some reports about there might be some in pork, and I'm not sure about the veracity of those reports or not. But I don't know, Stephen, have you looked into this issue?
Yeah, I don't know if you got my email on it or not. I also pasted an article from Meeting Place about it. There is some comment. There is some use in pork and in some other countries, but what you're saying is in beef. The concern is with the mRNA is that the lipid nanoparticles don't go away, that they may get in the meat or in the blood, and you may digest them. But if you do digest them, do they make it through the acid environment? Do they make it, through the cooking? Do they persist? And no one knows. They just put the stuff out. But I think it's probably likely that it doesn't have much of an impact, but there is discussion of it. So it's not completely alien, but nothing has been utilized yet. And most of the vaccines used, they're more traditional or conventional vaccines, especially peptide vaccines. So I don't know what would be the big impetus to move in that direction, but if any, I would share the link to the article I read that has sublinks in it. Unfortunately, it's behind a paywall for people in the industry, so I can't do that.
Yeah. I'm just going to shift here. There's a person on Brian Gillian asking about overview on coffee on the carnivore diet, and I'll just give you my observation. Again, I can't point to a randomized control trial on coffee consumption in the carnivore diet. I will point out to the fact that are there potential negatives of coffee? Yeah, for sure. I mean, we know it affects our physiology in a lot of ways. It's an appetite dysregulator. It's a mineral. It can cause problems with mineral absorption. Obviously, there's a whole addiction side of that. What I've seen is, that the people that give up coffee, a significant percentage of them say they feel better. However, a very significant percentage of them say they don't really notice a difference. And I tell people early on in a carnivore diet, if you're drinking coffee, just continue to do so. Just because of the caffeine withdrawal plus the carb and fiber, reduction might be just too much physiologically for the average person to take, and will make them very miserable. And therefore, I think if you're going to play with removing caffeine or coffee, you might want to wait till you're adapted to the diet for 3-4 months, and then consider maybe a month without coffee and seeing how you do. I can say that pretty easy because I never a coffee drinker. I never liked the stuff. I just never got into it. So I'm actually very happy because I know a lot of coffee drinkers, or they literally can't function until they've had a cup of coffee every morning. And I'm just like, I don't want to be in that situation where I just gotta, I'm slave to this sort of habit, or, I guess addiction is really what it is. So, Derek Josie had made a comment on that. I don't know, what did Derek have to say? I'm sure he's probably similar. It doesn't really make a big difference, I would imagine.
He had just basically it's about 5 minutes, and he said, as you said, Dr. Baker, that he'd heard of it in the for pigs, but definitely not in the meat and dairy industry. There hadn't been any done on cows thus far, and he had spoken to a lot of folks, at least not to his reach that he has.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Again, I mean, there's a lot of, this is separating what I think is real stuff from some of the more conspiratorial stuff, within the community is always a deal, I mean, like I said, and I think I'm reasonably reasonable about most of this stuff, but like I said, but same time, I mean, I don't know it all. I mean, I could be wrong about some of the stuff, but I'm just skeptical and stuff. So Charlie's got his hand up. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning. You mentioned the people from Holy Cow Beef in Lubbock. I'm just going to say that we actually purchased from them, and they are genuinely nice people. And they're more interested in the whole business, not just selling you something. So it's a pleasant experience just to talk with them about things.
Yeah, I mean, I think Weldon's the man, and I think it's Ann Warren is a wife, and I met their daughter, who's also very nice, and yeah, just a great. I mean, I got to tell you, I mean, every time I meet someone in the agriculture industry, ranchers and things like, they're just such nice people. I mean, they really are. I mean, it's just they're hardworking, down to earth, good. I mean, I think in many cases, very ethical people. The ones I've met, I'm sure there's some scoundrels out there like in every place, but I mean, by and large, I mean, these, I mean, I just, I tend to, I just think they're just really, I mean, there's certain professions, like we should trust doctors and things like that. And there's some professions that are despised, like, lawyers and taxmen and bankers. But I mean, and I think, most people don't tend to give these farmers and ranchers and food producers enough credit, because what they're doing is, I mean, I don't necessarily need even a doctor to be alive, but I damn sure need, a farmer or a rancher for the most part, unless I want to go out and hunt, and do my own food, which is a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot more work than I'm willing to do or have the time to do or the expertise to do, because, I mean, back, a few thousand years ago, all of us were doing that, and 50,000 years ago is the only profession there was, because that's all we did was hunt, and hunt and gather, I guess, but mostly hunt, I could imagine. So yeah, they're neat, nice people, and I think I'll try to get them on the podcast. I think I wanted to do that. I'll have to reach out to them and do that, because they're, and they're really hardcore regenerative people. I can tell you that from their stuff. And I was talking to them about my trip to Portugal, and Weldon was, I don't know if he's serious or kidding or not. I think he's relatively serious. He's like, thinking about maybe moving to Portugal and start a little regenerative farm out in Portugal. And I said, man, there's a lot of rolling hills out there that didn't have cows on it, where I think there could have been cows. So I don't know.
Shawn, I just wanted to quickly note, I put a link to a Twitter post I made that has the article that I posted in its entirety on MRA vaccine use in animals. Is it happening? Is it safe? So
Okay.
if people want more info, they can look at that article.
All right. So that is in the chat section of this thing here. So anyway,
So Shawn, I just wanted to share Weldon's advice for me, for anybody else. Because I had 20 acres, I had horses and alpacas that I, got before I went carnivore. And now, with the world craziness, it's like food security is an issue for me, and beef is the food to have, or lamb or goat or whatever. So he said to me, for somebody like me on a kind of homesteading, not wanting to run a beef ranch, but just having food security, he suggested something really clever that I hadn't heard before. He said, get an old Jersey cow, one that the milk industry has got rid of because she's past her prime milk producing days, but still producing milk and still a good animal. And then you can buy an orphaned calf very cheaply and put the calf on the milk dairy cow, and she'll feed the calf, and basically you don't have to milk the cow unless you wanted to take a liter of milk off. Essentially, you don't have to do the milking for the milking cow because she's got a calf on her. Feed up the calf and just keep repeating that. Just get new little orphaned calves and put her on a dairy cow. And I thought that actually, I hadn't sort of thought about that. That's a great suggestion. So he was very useful, very generous with his advice and education.
Interesting. Well, yeah, sounds like it could work. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's more to it than that, but yeah, I mean, that's how, I mean, obviously the calf will go to, I guess, adolescence maybe, or I don't know when they wean typically, but maybe 6 months or something like that. Then they're going to have to eat something beyond that. Yeah.
6 to 9.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, interesting. I'm just going to comment back on YouTube here, looking at some of the comments. Somebody's asked me about, I have fatty liver. Will carnivore help that? no guarantees, but certainly we do see that not uncommonly, that fatty liver gets better with carnivore. So yes, certainly it can. And then there's another person asking about why does conventional store, but I think it says bread. They put broad, but I assume that means bread hurt my guts. And I think it's, well, I mean, I would argue that bread is not something we're really designed that well to eat. I mean, we've been eating a long time as human beings. I mean, obviously making bread goes back to the cultivation of wheat or not much after that. So, probably, I don't know when the first breads were made, probably around 10,000 years ago, I'd guess. And, but I just don't think we're well adapted to that, particularly the modern breads. The modern wheat has been adulterated from even some of the older wheats. Like people talk about einkorn wheat versus the U.S. wheat and the different types. But I think in general, if you got Crohn's disease, bread would not be something I would ever eat. For food. And James talking about the carnivore panel. Yeah, about the longevity. Yeah, the longevity thing. Yeah, I mean, I think that is. I mean, anybody's in the longevity, whether it's David Sinclair, Peter Attia, Aubrey de Grey, or any of these people that think they're going to tell you they're going to live for a long time. It is a great racket to be in, because you've got where's your proof? I mean, there's no, I mean, do I get a money back guarantee if I don't live to 110? I mean, what do well, you live to 90. Well, I mean, if you didn't take my advice, you don't live to 85. There you go. It's just like, there's no way to verify that and stuff, I mean, so I will continue. And I don't think I'll ever, other than saying, don't be sick. But I mean, I think that, what I know that I can impact is someone's quality of life in the near future, in the near term. And whether they live longer or not, I have no idea. I have no clue. I don't think anybody actually does. And that's where the major criticism now of this carnivore diet is. Well, we don't know what's going to happen long term. Okay. Well, no one knows what's going to happen long term on anything. So it's like, that's your criticism. That's your best criticism, is that, well, you may be healthy now, but you're clearly going to die. Okay, well, we're all going to die. What's your point? And I mean, even if you say, well, you're more likely to have heart disease. Again, we don't have, randomized controlled trials or anything like that on yet. And in fact, most studies don't. Most diets can't claim that. But I mean, if this were so likely to induce heart disease, then I would expect me to be aware of, because, probably myself uniquely compared to many, many people, I spent my entire existence dealing with and talking with carnivore people. And I've not seen a high percentage of people having heart disease. Yes, there's a few anecdotal reports of people that, maybe already had heart disease and then they continue to have heart disease on a carnivore diet, but I'm not seeing a lot of de novo heart disease cropping up in vast percentages, certainly not higher than the standard diet. So if anything, it's in at least my observation, you're less likely to have heart disease on carnivore than you would be on the standard American diet. And I don't know how that compares against, say, a vegan diet or something else, but I'm sort of skeptical that those other diets probably have any better outcomes than we get. So long term, but certainly in the short term. And this is the thing, there's a lot of people will say, well, it doesn't matter if you're low fat or low carb, as long as you calorie restrict, that you're all going to lose weight. And, I'm like, okay, who cares? I'm more concerned about the fact that we have disease reversals. I mean, you can lose a bunch of weight and you can still have rheumatoid arthritis, and you can still be depressed, and you can still be, have hypothyroidism. That's, like I said, even if you go back and read my book and I talk about obesity or losing weight, and I very much said in that book, I don't really even care about this stuff. I don't really like talking about it because it's so contentious. I don't care why it works, how it works. I just care that it does work. And my major interest, and the whole reason we're starting this company, Revero, is because we have people that are sick and outside of obesity. And, yeah, sure. I mean, side effect, a lot of people lose weight, but how many people are out there reversing Crohn's disease and coming off biologic meds on the Mediterranean diet? I mean, I don't see a huge list of those people like we have here. And probably there are orders of magnitude more people that do the quote unquote Mediterranean style diet that is promoted. And I don't see thousands of people reversing disease like we see with us. So anyway,
Shawn, didn't you read Michael Greger's book, How Not to Die? He's not gonna die on his diet.
Goodness, yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, I think he said that's, did he say it's not going to give you immortality, but it'll make you die in a better way or something. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what, like I said, if I mean, she can just call the book should be called How Not to Live, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, he just doesn't look like anything I would want to aspire to be as far as, I mean, and, maybe there's some genetics there and he doesn't work out or something like that. But I mean, he just looks soft and squishy and metabolically inflamed. And, I mean, he's got this big bloated belly and no muscle mass to speak of. And, I don't know. I mean, it's, for different strokes for different folks. If that's what you want, that's fine. But, like I said, if you don't want that, maybe there's something else. It's funny when, because I've seen him doing videos on how to build muscle. And I'm like, man, talk about comedy. Okay. We've got like 1 or 2 minutes left, guys, and I got to run and do some consultations. Then I got a couple ribeye steaks cooking for me, which I'm looking forward to. So anyway, we have tomorrow, we have, I think we have a couple sessions tomorrow. I think we have a 9 and then an afternoon session. I can't remember if it's 1 or 2. And I know our afternoon sessions with Chris Kenobi, who is, for you guys that are maybe familiar with Chris, he's an ophthalmologist who has been doing things to hopefully reverse macular degeneration. And he is very much opposed to seed oils, I suppose. In fact, he gave me his book, which I'm still kind of working through on the and it's quite an interesting book, and I will talk about his book in more detail. I haven't had a chance to get through all of it, but it's quite detailed and I think quite an interesting read. A lot of historical stuff in there. I think it's kind of fascinating. So that'll be, I know he's got quite a YouTube video that's quite popular about the topic. So Chris Kenobi, Knobbe. So he'll be here tomorrow afternoon. I think we have a success story in the morning. So that will be that. It's great seeing everybody again. Like, I know it was more fun seeing you in real life, I got to admit, but it's good to see you guys online too. And I will be back, again tomorrow. You guys have a great rest of your day. Folks on YouTube, thanks for signing in as well.